Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. One of our subs, the Homelander, left a great comment on our most recent video. Please go check that out. He said, Hartenstein makes us the team coming out of the West. However, the Celtics might be too good to beat at the moment. Agreed. I agree with the majority of that statement. I think it hits the nail on the head. I think, this is why we like the signing in the first place, because it addresses one of your biggest needs and holes going into the next season. So you kind of patch that up and, you're going to be able to continue to add on to that roster. But the Celtics are looking pretty scary.
Yeah. I mean, again, with Oklahoma City, as you mentioned, they, in the offseason so far, right, they were able to kind of re-sign some guys they already had. They took Isaiah Hartenstein from the Knicks, which, again, as you mentioned, the position of need for them and a player of need for them. And then they also traded for Caruso. So in other words, they were the number one seed in the West, albeit not the best team, but they were the number one seed and they got better. And so now they're kind of positioning themselves to be possibly the team to beat in the West.
Yeah. So agreed 100%. So you guys have been interacting with our content like crazy. The views are super duper up. The comments are up as well. So shout out to you guys. Big shout out to you guys. And before we do get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
So obviously, we're almost a week into free agency, right? And since the last time we met, we had some big things happen, right? Obviously, LeBron James, he re-signed with the Lakers on a 2-year, $100+ million contract, right? And this is kind of key because before the start of free agency, right, it was reported that LeBron was willing to take a pay cut if the Lakers could possibly bring in some help using the mid-level exception, right? The article from Chris Haynes and others, right, basically kind of said the type of player you'd be willing to take a pay cut for included the likes of guys like James Harden, Klay Thompson, Jonas Valanciunas. They struck out on all three, right? Harden, which we kind of expected, re-signed with the Clippers, right? Klay Thompson, as we've already talked about, did a sign and trade with the Dallas Mavericks. And then Jonas Valanciunas went to the Washington Wizards, right? So you went 0 for 3. And now the free agency market is pretty dried up, right? Not that there aren't, good players, but not necessarily anyone worth taking a major pay cut for, right? Now, I guess DeMar DeRozan technically is the best free agent on the market, I guess. But, a lot of people have been saying that he's probably going to go to a team through a sign and trade because he doesn't want to take an MLE, which is understandable because it wouldn't be for much money. Maybe if something dries up, then he takes like a 1-year deal and then kind of just tries to maximize that year and then get a big deal next year, but we don't know. So, if you're the Lakers, you're in a rough spot, right? Because obviously now you're going to be entering the second apron when he signs that contract. Now, they did say he could take $1 million less to keep him right below the second apron to give them a little bit of flexibility because once you're in that second apron, as we've talked about many times, it is very difficult to be able to make a lot of significant moves, and this should not be a second apron team in that they're not quite good enough to, kind of limit the amount of flexibility they have, right? Because basically right now, they haven't really signed anybody, right? They basically just signed back guys that were already on the team, right? They're going to re-sign LeBron. They re-signed Max Christie to a 4-year, $32 million deal. And then obviously they drafted Dalton Knecht and Bronny James, right? So after that, Taurean Prince is gone. He went to Milwaukee, right? So obviously you can't bring him back. And then Spencer Dinwiddie's still a free agent. We don't know how much he'll get, probably a minimum, but who knows at this point. So not to mention the other guys that they grabbed last year were on player options, and they all opted in. So that was Cam Reddish, Jackson Hayes, Christian Wood. So now all three of those guys have opted in, so you don't have open roster spots. They have 15 basically once they sign LeBron and Christie. And so it becomes, again, significantly harder to do anything. There have been trade rumors, which we'll get into in a minute, but that's a pretty rough situation, right? Because essentially, you struck out on all the major guys you wanted, at least in the free agency market. They didn't even until recently have an assistant coaching staff at all, right? Like they just hired Nate McMillan, Scott Brooks, fine. But, it's been pretty rough so far for them as an offseason. Now, again, obviously, we'll talk about a couple of trade scenarios before before we get to some other teams. But yeah, just kind of your early thoughts on what's going on so far.
Yeah, it's been a crap show. Like, if you want me to be honest, in terms of what we've seen from the Lakers, like you said, struck out on every single target that they, had initially. And then now you're hearing even like reports of a guy that, signed somewhere else, Buddy Hield, saying he declined. He thought the Warriors had a better chance of winning over the Lakers, which I guess in theory, yeah. But at the same time, you can't even really attract some guys like that. So, I think that kind of speaks volumes to the potential dysfunction that's going on with the Lakers. But at the end of the day, you were able to, re-sign LeBron, which we all knew was coming. Sign Bronny and connect to their rookie deals or whatever. But yeah, I think it's been a very disappointing offseason for the Lakers because, they swung and missed. And it's crazy. Like, if you look at, where these guys went, you would kind of think that Clay would potentially be intrigued by the whole Lakers situation as well as like Valanciunas also. But, they just, I don't know. It's crazy like to think that Valanciunas really went to the Wizards over the Lakers. But yeah, for me, it's just like, geez, what's next? Because who else is really available that would make an impact for next season? Like a significant improvement where it's like, because people are forgetting that this is like, LeBron's probably like final contract with the Lakers, in my opinion. Like, I don't foresee him like, playing beyond this contract. And it's like, you guys got to win, at least win, like have a great season where, the regular season is good with no speed bumps and stuff like that. Like you want to be playing a smooth game. And I don't know, because I think the thing that's intriguing about the Lakers is you have a lot of pieces on the roster, which are awesome, but I just don't think they've been developed properly and utilized properly in the past, where it's like we didn't really see a whole lot of Max Christie, so I'm hoping that signifies that they have belief in the younger guys like that, and they can step up into some awesome roles, because I think they can do it. But still, I think you need some other impact guys, but this free agency class is just not looking too hot. So yeah, it's been disappointing.
Right, because in terms of remaining guys, I mean, again, like DeRozan, but he's probably going elsewhere, right? If a team can get him through a sign and trade, he's definitely going elsewhere because then he'll get more money. Other guys, I guess, like Markelle Fultz, Gary Trent Jr., Miles Bridges, but I mean, there's been talks about him maybe going to either like Cleveland or, the Clippers, and of course, he's got all the off-court stuff, that you have to think about as well.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. And there's like nobody that you'd really take a pay cut. Like, you're not taking a pay, like, LeBron is not taking a pay cut for Markelle Fultz or like Gary Trent Jr. Like, and nor should he.
No,
so,
nobody would be asking him to do that.
Yeah, because essentially the pay cut kind of puts it on the Lakers to kind of do something. And like, there's other variables at play as well, right? Because say like with Golden State, they didn't want to take back any salary. So it's like, they would, the Dallas deal was easier for them because they didn't have to take anybody back. Whereas if it was the Lakers, reportedly, it would have been D'Angelo Russell going back, and Golden State didn't want that, right? And also, like, because like with Clay, it also would have been more money. Which, if it was 4 years, $80 million, I don't really know if I would have liked that. That's a lot of money, for Clay at this point. But if it's a guy you want, like, you have to find a way to be able to sell him on that, right? But either way, that's rough. So
it just hurts not to get a big, though. Like that's I think the biggest issue.
Right, because now, other than AD, it's the same bigs as last year, right? Which Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes, not terrible players or anything, but they don't necessarily fit the archetype of like a physical big that can play next to AD that can bang with other centers, right? Exactly. Like they can play next to him, but it's just not the same as like having like a Dwight Howard or like you mentioned a Valanciunas or somebody like that. Next to him. So, like, there's other like reasons for why those guys went to those other teams. Like even with Valanciunas, right? Like it was probably more years.
Yes.
Right. Even though it's less, it would have been less than the MLE. Like it's still an extra year, which is more preferable, I think, for most players than just like 1 or 2 years. But it's a decent amount of, but it's like a little bit more money.
Yeah, it gives you longevity, security, and also a great option to be traded at some point mid-contract.
Right. Yeah. So there have been some trade proposals that have been, I guess, reported by Anthony Irwin, and in terms of like teams that the Lakers have been talking to. So they've been talking to teams like the Blazers, the Nets, the Wizards, and then the Raptors as well, right? So yeah, I know you're a Wizards fan. So basically, Portland, kind of obvious, right? Jeremy Grant, right, for sure. The Nets, Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, the Raptors, Bruce Brown, and the Wizards, Kyle Kuzma. So, of those teams, which one do you think, like, and obviously, like, there could always be, like, another random one that comes out of nowhere. Like, I know there were talks about them maybe talking to Utah about something, but who knows? But, of those 4 teams, I guess the main question is, which players, like, in those deals make the most sense? Like, in terms of, like, of the preferences. Because I think the issue is there's been talks about 2 first-round picks, and I personally don't know if 2 first-round picks would make a lot of sense, because that's basically all you have, which is kind of an overpay. But, you don't have many other options left. So, of those 4 ones, which one's the best one, and is it even worth it if it's 2 picks?
All right. From a Wizards fan's perspective, I'm gonna start there. Like, yeah, I'd love to take 2 first-round picks for Kuzma. You can have him back. But in reality, like, if we're looking at it from an objective standpoint, I don't think he's really worth 2 first-round picks.
I don't think
especially 2 first-round Lakers picks where, you don't just have that, and you don't just have picks to give away. You're not just sitting on, a mountain of picks. Like, this is arguably, make or break for you guys. So it's like, if all those guys are being valued at that and more potentially, I don't know how I feel about that.
Right. I think some of them are 1.
Okay. I wouldn't mind 1, but that means like, it's kind of like you're in a similar situation with the Warriors where, like, if they, hypothetically say they did acquire Paul George, that's it. Like, that's going to probably be your final run with the LeBron and Anthony Davis era. Like, say if you go LeBron, AD, Jeremy Grant, you said, like, it's like that doesn't make me jump for joy. That makes me question if this season's going to be a fun one or not, So that's kind of how I feel about the names that you throw out. Like, I'm sure they would help a team, and I'm sure they could help the Lakers in all reality, but do they put them in contention? That's what I'm kind of looking at it from. And it's like,
because I think it's very clear that, like, the front office and ownership is, like, not all that into the idea of trading because remember, like, when we were at the deadline and, like, they didn't do anything, and basically the rationale was, we're not going to use them because we're going to save them for a star in the summer. Well, it's the summer.
Right.
And there's no stars available. So now what are you going to do? Right. Like Donovan Mitchell, which we haven't even talked about. I guess we'll talk about that eventually. He signed an extension, right? So he's staying in Cleveland, right? Trae Young, well, they traded DeJounte Murray. So they may not even trade Trae Young, right? They might just keep him. And then after that, the other guys, you're still, you're still probably not going to be able to get them, just because there will probably be other teams that can up the ante for an offer. Like, say, like a Lauri Markkanen, right? Like, there are other teams that I think would have better offers on the table, right? So, and then the problem also is, like, say if you're the Lakers and you make a deal, you're not giving up guys on mid-level, like, mediocre contracts that don't really play. You have to give up somebody that plays. Like, presumably D'Lo is in probably, like, every deal in this, right?
Yeah.
And then it's probably a combination of, like, him plus one of either, like, a Rui, maybe Gabe Vincent or something like that. Not all together, but, like, you'd have to give up at least 1 or 2 guys that actually play for them. So that's the other part that makes it tough as well. So, and that's the thing with D'Lo, is that, like, he's a good player where you don't necessarily want to just throw him away for nothing. But at the same time, like, the value clearly around the league is almost telling you, like, he's not that valuable to most teams. So, so I guess the question is like, of those, I don't know, because, like, I guess you could say technically Grant is the best player, but, like, would any team feel good about giving up 2 first-round picks for Jeremy Grant? Like, probably not. He's already 30 on, like, a very sizable contract.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's going to be 2 first-round picks and more.
Those, like, and that's the tough spot that they're in, because, again, there's no, like, easy move to make, and clearly they don't want to just make a move to make a move, which is understandable because you don't have much left. It's just tough because it goes back to the Westbrook deal, because that was pretty much the deal that kind of shut everything down. Right? Because after that, you gave up a lot to get him. Then you had to give up something in order to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And now
shout
you're
out Tommy Shepard, man.
What you got. You said what?
I said shout out Tommy Shepard, man.
Yeah, and then basically you're trying to, get rid of what you got back for him again. except this time you don't have as much left. And LeBron and AD are older than they were, in the past. So that's the other tough part as well. So, like, there's still, I guess, some belief that maybe something happens, but I feel like the worst case scenario is you run it back. Because if you run it back, like, that's pretty much like a concession that, like, yeah, this is pretty much a wrap. But like you said, if they do run it back, I guess you can hope for progression from some guys, but it probably still won't be enough. Like, it's still probably, if they run it back, it's probably a play-in team. And then you still have to factor in, like, they were a play-in team with LeBron and AD playing, like, 70 games.
Yeah.
So, like, what if they don't play 70 games? What if they play, like, 60? Or something like that? Because they're going to be in the Olympics. Obviously, like, a lot of the games that they won were in the latter part of the season. But you can't get off to, like, I don't know, you can't have a bad stretch, like, if you want to avoid the play-in. Because, to be fair, like, coming out of the in-season tournament, they were a top 5 seed, but then they had a horrible stretch that basically forced them into the 9-10 spot for, like, most of the season, right? So even when they were winning, it didn't matter. So, like, you can't start the season off bad, nor can you have any real rough stretch at any point of the season. And so, I don't know. Like you said, there's some arguments about the roster wasn't necessarily optimized all that great. So, maybe with a new coaching staff, maybe it looks better, but it feels like you kind of have to do something.
Yeah, and health was a little bit of a factor too for some of your key rotational guys. Like, I feel like if Vando, like, if Vando was there, not saying, he's make or break for your team, but I feel like he adds a little bit on a lot on the defensive end. Gabe Vincent, that was another thing that kind of just, was like a fart in the wind, if you want me to be real. Like, that was a great, like, we were hyping that move up just like the rest of the NBA world. We were like, they won the offseason. And then, you look at what happened during the season, and now, they're having a quieter offseason, which I think could potentially be good. But from, like, a fan perspective, I get it. It's like, it seems like they're just sitting on their hands, and especially when you see every single target that I think that they've talked about. Even going back to the deadline, DeJounte Murray being moved to New Orleans, and then you look at the deal compared to what, they were asking for from you, and it's like, all right, bro, like, this is a lose-lose situation. Like, we just can't win. So, disappointing for the Lakers for sure.
Right. Because that's the tough part, where it's like, I feel like if the pay cut thing was never reported, like, then you wouldn't even know that some of those guys would have even been, like, realistic targets. Like, maybe you would have, like, heard a report about, like, oh, they're interested in Clay, but you wouldn't have had, like, an actual expectation that you could get him.
Yeah, it would have been like an unspoken thing where if you have a brain, you would know who has to take the pay cut versus it being said out loud and scaring people away, probably.
Yeah, so, we'll see. Another team that had a different offseason, right? Because they, there's been a lot more activity, is Golden State, right? So obviously, they've done some other things, right? Unlike the Lakers, they've had a more active offseason, right? Obviously, they had, the big man they took in the draft, but more importantly, right? They lost out on Clay, or they did a sign and trade, right? He went to Dallas, didn't get back any players, got like a second or two, and so far, right? They brought in 3 guys, right? So by not taking back anything for Clay, they had the full MLE, and they used that to bring in DeAnthony Melton, right, who was the starting guard for Philly last year before he had, a bunch of back issues. They also did a sign and trade with Minnesota and didn't send anything out or take anything back or whatever for Kyle Anderson, right, on a 3-year, $27 million deal. And they also did a sign and trade with Philly for Buddy Hield. So now, right, you basically let Klay Thompson and Chris Paul go, and you brought in DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and Kyle Anderson. So how do you feel about that?
I hate it, number one. But I do understand what their thought process was, because, we talked about the whole Chris Paul thing. All right, cool. And then we also talked about Clay leaving. We were curious, what was going to be the return. What were they going to do in the next, coming weeks? And, they made their move. And I get it. They basically split prime Clay up into 2 people, where you have, an elite shooter in Buddy Hield, and then a pretty good 2-way guard in DeAnthony Melton. And then Kyle Anderson is brought in for whatever reason. But me personally, I just don't think these moves really make a whole lot of difference. I think they help you in terms of your depth. And I think, you're obviously going to be looking at Pods. You're going to be looking at Kuminga as well, Moody. Like, these are going to be their pivotal years alongside Steph as well. Draymond. Like, I feel like they're probably just looking for like not necessarily a complete overhaul, but just a different look from the bench, which I understand what they're trying to do, but I feel like the starters need some help as well. But I just don't like. I'm from a money perspective. I love the moves. Like it doesn't impede on you whatsoever financially, but from a winning perspective and a basketball perspective, like I think these guys have some questions. Like Melton, I think he's good when he's healthy, and then you have Buddy Hield, who I think is awesome from the 3-point line, but is also known to disappear. We saw what he did in Philly, and he's a defensive liability as well. And then Kyle Anderson could be a threat from the 3-point line if he has enough time to get the shot off. But he could do some things defensively, which will help them. But it just doesn't make me feel too good about them going into the next season. I think other teams in the West made some better moves. Not even like counting free agency, like through the draft. I feel like some of the better teams like made some better moves.
Right. So like, there's also been talks about them acquiring possibly Lauri Markkanen, right? So obviously, if they can swing a deal like that, right, that lifts their floor and their ceiling. I guess the main question is, if they get him, would that in your mind put them into the contender sphere, or like is it more dependent on what they would give up, or does it not matter to you?
It doesn't matter to me. I think either way, it still just doesn't make me feel like they're going to have anything, because I think Markkanen isn't in that tier where he's a superstar or even really a star. I just think he's a really good player on a bad team, and we've kind of seen this happen multiple times. And I think the thing that sets him apart though is his frame, his body, and his height and his skill at that height where it's like, okay, this is a legit guy where he can do a lot with the ball, he could shoot. You do have questions about his defense, because where would he play? Would he play the 4? Would he play the 5? But either way, like, you're going to be losing something as well. So I'm going to assume it'd be like Kuminga, other stuff, probably maybe like Wiggins or something like that. But I don't know. It just doesn't make me feel too hot on it, because like when I think of a championship team, I'm thinking of what the Boston Celtics look like, not the Warriors as currently constructed plus Markkanen.
Right.
That's how I feel about it.
Plus, you still have the other teams in the West to deal with, including, 3 of the top 4 teams in the West. I think you can make a very strong case that they improved, right? Especially 100%. Oklahoma City definitely improved.
Minnesota.
I think both you and I think Minnesota improved. And then, Dallas. you can make the case, depending on how you feel about Clay's impact, right?
Yeah.
Can he still get it done defensively compared to Derek Jones Jr.? We don't know, but, he's still like a good player. And they also brought in Quentin Grimes. So that's the issue, is like you'd have to go through those 4 teams. You also need a really good Steph year, also a very healthy Steph year, because he played 70 plus games, which again he could still do it again, but if he has to miss any significant time, I think it's going to be really tough. Unless they get like if you get Markkanen, that helps, but if you don't get Markkanen, that's where it becomes more difficult, because you don't have a secondary creator scorer. I guess maybe Kuminga, like if he has a really good year 4, but is that enough? Like I don't know, but. In terms of the signings, like, I think they're fine. Like, I don't really have much of an issue with them, because, like, given the fact that Clay's gone, like, what could you really do? Like, I think for what it is, those are fine moves. I guess I just don't necessarily know if I'm quite as high on them as some other people, but I'm not maybe as low on it, as, like, maybe you are. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of just fine. You know what I mean? Like, last year, I think we thought Golden State's offseason was okay. Like, I don't think either of us were like that hyped about the Chris Paul trade. Like, maybe we thought it might, help in some ways, but it kind of turned out how we, it was worse than I guess what we expected, but I don't think either of us were like, oh yeah, this makes them like way, way better. And technically they won more games, but the result was worse, because now the West is better, because you also have to factor in Memphis too.
Yeah, you have to factor in a bunch of teams at the bottom who, added to their rosters as well. So that's kind of what I was hinting at, where teams around the Warriors, I think, have done a lot more in terms of their signings and definitely worked through the draft as well. So I'm curious where they do end up. And like you were talking about, you need like not necessarily a career year from Steph, but I think he needs one of those turn back the clock years where, he's looking like a top guy.
Yeah. So, I guess kind of an interesting wrinkle in terms of the offseason so far is the amount of sign and trades. Like, we've seen a ton of them, which you don't normally, you'll see them, but like not as often as what we've normally seen, and also for players that I don't think you would have expected to be dealt with sign and trades. Reportedly that's what a lot of people are saying, like that's what more teams have to kind of do nowadays, possibly in order to pull off some of these moves, just because with the new CBA there's some more wrinkles and whatnot, but just because you look at the remaining free agency list, right, in terms of like guys that are still on the board, and you do kind of wonder, like, say like a DeMar DeRozan. Obviously, people have talked about him as a possible sign and trade candidate. Maybe like a Markelle Fultz, maybe, but in terms of like I don't know, also Miles Bridges, but just regards to like some of the remaining free agents on the board, like what are your thoughts like in terms of like guys that are still left that can still make like a big impact for a team? Because
Sure.
again, like because a lot of the top guys are starting, are already off the board at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyus Jones is probably the number one guy on my radar because I think there are a lot of teams that could use his ability to be, the best backup point guard, and we've seen him do it in years past. We also saw him be a starting point guard this year. Wasn't necessarily amazing from a collective standpoint from the Wizards, but I think you look at his individual numbers. All right, cool. He's just getting a little older. That's all it is. Pushing 28. So,
Yeah,
I think that's one of my guys is probably alongside. I mean, Markelle Fultz kind of, because I feel like that's an intriguing one where he's probably peaked at this point, but it's a lot better than what it was,
right.
his rookie year. So I think he's a serviceable point guard, probably best utilized as a backup as well. Obviously, DeMar DeRozan, we've heard the rumors about that with, preferably a sign and trade. So I don't even really count him at this point. And like you talked about, I think also, I think Cam Payne would be an interesting one because I think he can add as well. I'm really kind of focusing on backup point guards here. Isaac Okoro, what do they do with him in terms of Cleveland? Are they still high on him? I know this is crazy. Like, yeah, we're trying to hype up these guys. Like, this is kind of the caliber of this free agent class, and we saw a lot of people hating on the free agency class, rightfully so. I'm looking around. These names are kind of wild. Like Doug McDermott. I don't know. Like, and that Evan Fournier. Like, some of these guys probably will not get signed. Maybe
Right.
Later in the season, but Josh Okogie, Dario Saric. I feel like Saric is an interesting one.
Yeah.
You
Some
know,
people some people have talked about Denver possibly, adding him in terms of like maybe he
that
goes
could work.
there. Obviously we don't know for sure, but we also know that Denver, might be interested in adding Westbrook. Reportedly
Sure.
Jokic, is a big fan of that type of addition, which I wouldn't have even thought, but just kind of interesting.
I think it would like that's what I was talking about when we first heard about it. I was like, that would be an awesome fit because I feel like you can probably like squeeze him in to play minutes with the starters, and they could pull off some stuff that we probably haven't even thought of, like systematically and X and O's and stuff like that. But like obviously him running the bench in the second unit would be awesome. What about a Chetty Osman? What do we think about him? Where do we think he lands?
Yeah, I mean, that's another two-way, wing. Obviously the Spurs weren't interested in bringing him back, but he is a guy that, has been able to, play minutes for, a couple of teams. I think he was on Cleveland a couple seasons ago. So,
Yeah.
again, it's like I feel like it's another guy where he probably won't be one of the next guys signed. Like if I had to guess, it could be like a Caleb Martin, right? They get signed before him. But obviously, like, Osman, I'm gonna assume will be a cheaper guy than say like a Caleb
Oh
Martin,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
Martin, was a starter at one point for a team that went to the finals versus, Osman is more like a backup guy. Even though like Martin probably on a really good team is more like a backup too. But I
Yeah,
think he's a
sure.
better backup than Osman.
Yeah. I mean, you guys can look at the class and see the names. It's nothing like spectacular, really no stars. Like we talked
Right.
about, we already mentioned DeRozan. It's
Yeah.
really a bunch of impact players and rotational pieces that might not even end up really playing a whole lot of significant minutes. That's the problem.
Right. And the big thing is that, as was kind of hinted at also, like a lot of these signings, they're not official until July 6th, right? Which is whatever day it is. Whoops, let me replay that again. Had it that was funny. Where's the calendar? There we
It's
go.
Saturday.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, also keep in mind, a lot of these signings aren't official until July 6th, right? Which is on a Saturday, right? So obviously some of these deals that are sign and trades and some of these other moves have not actually even been officially done yet. because I think some of these deals are supposedly going to be merged into bigger deals, right? Which may be like multi-team trades, and that might be able to help facilitate some of these other guys to kind of, make these teams because, like you said, like there are guys that can still help these teams, but how many of these guys are going to have to take minimum contracts because like
Right.
some of these guys are better than minimum contract players, and the only way that they may be able to get more than that is they're either going to have to get signed by a team with remaining cap space, which is kind of drying up, or it has to be a sign and trade. Like if you're
Yeah.
DeMar DeRozan, you're not taking a minimum contract, right? You're,
No.
worst case scenario MLE, best case scenario sign and trade.
Yeah, and I am looking at Detroit. I'm curious what they do because I think they're one of the teams with a significant amount of cap space left as well. So, nothing that'll push them into like winning territory. I don't think, but
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
This free agent class is a drag, and we talked about that.
Yeah. So, another big story that kind of happened, over the week, right, since the last time, that we recorded, right? Donovan Mitchell, right? He signed a 3-year extension, right? So obviously, if you followed, right, with the Cavs, he signed a 3-year, $150 million extension. So obviously, at least for the short term, he's a Cav, right? And this is something that people have kind of gone back and forth with for a while, right? After their season ended, you thought maybe he might be moved, but then we started to hear more reports that no, they're actually thinking of keeping him and maybe moving some other pieces. So I guess obviously now, you know, if you're Cleveland, obviously you kind of ideally would want to sign him to an extension just so that way you're not in a position where he walks, right? So worst case scenario, if things completely go off the rails, you can trade him. Obviously now he's going to make way more money, so it may be a little bit more difficult to trade him than it would have been before. But also, if you're Cleveland, you gave up a lot of stuff, to get him, right? It was like Lauri Markkanen, along with like a bunch of draft picks. And so, you kind of have to justify doing that trade by, in a way, keeping him. Now, again, we both have felt that, ideally it probably would have been better to still sell high on him and then just kind of see what you can do with the young guys. But clearly now, right, at least for like I said, the short term, they're very committed, right, to building around this core, right? They obviously brought in Kenny Atkinson as the new coach to replace JB Bickerstaff. But, what's next for Cleveland, right? Because obviously there's also been rumors about them maybe chasing after a Brandon Ingram. Of course, there's been lots of talks about New Orleans probably going to trade him in the offseason, right? Because, you look at their roster and it feels like there's a hole, and that hole might be able to be plugged by trading one of the guys on the roster. And it feels like it's probably Ingram, even though he is really good. It's not like he's, a useless player or anything. But, what are your thoughts on this extension? And, what are your thoughts on what the Cavs should do next? Because obviously, like now, this kind of opens the door for a lot of possibilities with what they could do with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to spark a lot of rumors within Cleveland. Number one, I do like the extension. Um, I was more so on the side of things where I thought you should kind of build around your young guys and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. But like you said, some people don't want to bite the bullet and take the L very quickly, as you kind of saw with DeJounte Murray and things like that. So I get it. And I think this extension is a big deal, just considering what they did give up. And I think it will potentially change what Cleveland looks like going into the next season. I think Darius Garland will probably be on the trading block, but he himself, I think, has come out and said that he doesn't necessarily want out. So I don't know what's going on with that, but I just feel like they just can't coexist. So that's something to watch for sure. And then obviously, I feel like that takes, because I know a couple of teams were after him. I know Houston was after him,
Yeah.
Donovan Mitchell. So that crosses him off the board. So where do those teams kind of pivot to? Are they done, for their offseason? So that's another question that it raises as well. But, bringing in Kenny Atkinson alongside re-signing Donovan Mitchell, I think, from a Cleveland general manager perspective, I think the offseason is kind of going exactly the way that they kind of wanted it to. You got new blood and new coach in there. And obviously, you got your star player to re-sign and extend. So big W for Cleveland, I think. But it does raise some big question marks about Darius Garland.
Right, yeah, because again, the main thing is you still don't have the wing that you kind of need, right? Because,
Yeah.
like, again, Okoro is a restricted free agent, but even if you brought him back, he's not the ideal wing in that group, right?
Yeah.
Because he's a little undersized, right? Obviously, he's become an improved shooter, but again, we saw in that Boston series they were leaving him open, right? They weren't really worried or concerned about his offense, at all, right? Like ideally, because like the thing is like if you traded for Ingram, even that probably wouldn't be like the ideal fit next to like Mitchell and Garland,
Yeah.
and
I
then
agree.
Mobley and Allen or whatever. Like, I mean, really, like you would like more of like a 3-and-D wing
Yep.
that's not as high usage,
Yep.
right? That's athletic, willing to rebound and do all that other stuff. Like, I don't really feel like you need like another scorer next to those
You
guys.
want
I
a
mean,
Jaden
again, like,
McDaniels. Like you want somebody like that.
right,
Somebody of that
yeah,
vein.
yeah, but obviously, like, is that available right now?
No.
Like,
No.
probably not. Like right now, like I mean, I guess the best forwards on the trade market is, I guess, possibly, right? Because we don't know what Utah is going to do. Is like a Lauri Markkanen or like a Brandon Ingram, right? Because obviously, like those guys are better than like Grant or Kuzma or Cam Johnson,
Sure.
or others. But again, like if you're Cleveland, like I don't know, like there's still some questions for them, right? Because obviously, like you're hoping that the young guys also improve. Because if they improve, then that raises the floor, and the ceiling, I guess, of the roster. But
Yes.
still, is the core good enough to be able to, come out of the East? Probably not, right? Like you're still probably in that like middle of the pack mix, right? Like you're probably not better than Boston or Philly or New York, right?
Yeah. Because
Like are they
they're
better? Are they better than Milwaukee?
Cleveland.
Yeah,
No, I don't think
like
so. Fully, if both
right,
teams are fully healthy, I'm probably taking Milwaukee just because of Giannis.
yeah, the
Um,
Giannis,
and that makes a ton of sense. But I feel like with this extension, like it's so hard to kind of talk about it because you can look at it from both perspectives. I think it's more of like a lowercase W where it puts you in an awkward position because you have you don't really have a lot of money to spend on free agents. If you want to make a big change, you're probably going to have to trade one of the four guys. And, all eyes, I think, are on either Garland or Jared Allen. So, I don't even know what those guys' value looks like.
right?
I feel like Garland's value is good for the long run because he's so
Mhm.
young and has a ton of potential. But I also feel like there's a way where his value might have taken a big hit just because of the kind of season that he had last year. But yeah, I think it puts him in a sticky situation. But yeah, I 100% think Milwaukee is better than Cleveland at this point.
Yeah. And then also, like, even in the draft, they didn't really address like
Uh,
any of their roster issues. I mean,
they
they
drafted
drafted
Jalen Tyson?
yeah, Jalen Tyson, and obviously he's an older rookie, right? He's already 22, but he still doesn't really, address what they need. So, I
Yeah, he
mean,
doesn't scream 3-and-D.
right. Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see what Cleveland does because again, there's still some room for improvement in the trade market, but
That's all they can
again,
do.
it's like yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just the question is, do they move on from one of the other guys or do they still kind of just stand pat? I don't know. Because like I said, I think ideally you need a wing. If you can get that, they could be really good. I still probably wouldn't pick them to come out of the East, but I think they would at least be better than they were, the last couple of seasons.
Yeah. Do you have any destinations for Garland if he is moved?
I
Just off the
mean,
dome?
yeah, I mean, I guess before the Chris Paul signing, like that would have kind of been like a really nice spot. But how much are the Spurs willing to spend?
Right.
Is kind of an issue, right? Like, say some people have mentioned Minnesota, but again, like, are they going to do that right now? Like, because clearly they cut some salary, but they also in a way improved because they drafted a guard, in the draft. So like, I don't necessarily know if that's a Garland situation anymore. Like, it almost feels like he might just be stuck there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, unless like because the issue is that you're selling low. But let's say he has a bounce back year, even if the Cavs, don't do any better than they did the year before, if he can show that like last year was a setback, but I am still really good, then you could sell high.
Yeah.
Because now with the Mitchell extension, you're not under as much pressure, as you were before. Because now you've got him locked up for a
Yeah.
while.
And you can always trade Donovan Mitchell if that doesn't work out and you figure out he might be the quote unquote problem.
Yeah. And then, another team that kind of made some moves, the Clippers, right? So obviously Paul George, right? It's kind of similar to Golden State, right? The Clippers, they let Paul George walk, right? We knew that was coming. for a little while,
Hmm.
right? But then obviously they brought back and re-signed Harden to a 2-year deal. But then they also brought in Derrick Jones Jr., Nicholas Batum, Kevin Porter Jr., Mo Bamba, and then also Chris Dunn, which is supposed to be a sign and trade, so that isn't official yet, right? Presumably, if they do that, somebody's coming out of the Clippers. But just in terms of the signing so far, like, what do you think about, the moves that they made? Because they did bring in, like, a number of players. Again, I don't. Does it make them better than it was when they had Paul George? Like, I mean, probably not, but it could. But I mean, like, I guess you're adding more depth, but it probably doesn't put them back into the contender sphere.
Yeah, the only way they're in the contender sphere for me is if Kawhi plays, a decent ton of games, and also what does he look like in the playoffs. But in regards to the signings, I think I like this more than the Warriors. I think you added a ton of guys. You're also taking a couple of risks as well,
Right.
bringing back a Kevin Porter Jr. But I think his skill kind of speaks for itself, and you get a little bit of explosive offense alongside James Harden. And also, I feel like he's another guy where not necessarily under a lot of pressure, but I think this is more of a prove it deal where can you prove to us that you've still got something left in the tank? And what does this Harden look like? Because now it's going to be him and Kawhi versus him, Paul George, and Kawhi. So I think,
Right.
we're going to probably see a higher usage rate version of Harden, which I think could potentially be a good thing. But it once again, it's a gamble. And I like that considering where they are as a franchise. You let go of one of your guys that you gave up the farm to get. And you brought in a bunch of guys as well, which I think is kind of how I feel. And I think these guys are a little bit higher quality than the ones that Golden State brought in. And I think these guys fit their identity. And like I said, I like the gamble that they're taking.
Yeah. I think the difference you could make with the Clippers and Warriors one is that, like, say for the Clippers, like, you lost a wing, but you brought in some other ones. Whereas,
Right.
like, with Golden State, like, like, you brought it, like, you have a lot of guards, and it feels like there's still another, like, sizable move that needs to be made. Not that the Clippers don't need to make a sizable move, but
Right.
you know, it feels like, oh, okay, maybe you could swap out like Norman Powell, or somebody else like that makes money that you could switch out and bring in somebody else, versus with Golden State, it almost kind of feels a little bit more like marketing or bust. But at the same time, like, I still feel like the Clippers. It's kind of hard for me to put them in the contender sphere because you still have questions even beyond the rest of the roster with the two stars. Because like you said with Kawhi, he's got to be healthy, right? He played the most games that he's played in quite a while, and then still couldn't make it through the postseason. And then with Harden, he's older than Kawhi. He's 35, and last year what kind of made sense for him in a way, I think, was kind of the fact that you weren't as reliant on him, right? Like it was like a lower usage role, but
Sure.
now he's back to a higher usage role, and it feels like the more reliant you are on him, like the worse it kind of gets for your team, mainly in the postseason.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Postseason. Yeah, for
because I
sure.
think that's kind of the bigger issue. Like, but at the same time, with some of the guys they brought in, like let's say if a Kevin Porter Jr. works out, that's a guy that we saw before he was out of the league. He showed he could be like a solid scorer off the bench, right? You have another guy off the bench, right? I guess in Norman Powell if he stays. So, you have some other perimeter scorers and you have Kawhi, but it still feels like there's some other questions with this group. I
Yeah.
think is kind of the main thing.
Yeah. There's tons of questions, but
Like,
I think I feel better about them than I do the Warriors.
I guess the main question is, do you feel like they got worse?
Yes, but not
Yeah.
to the point where it's like red alarms worse, because
Okay.
I think you still have Kawhi. Like I'm putting a lot of, faith in Kawhi and James Harden. That's the thing. Like I feel like Kawhi and James Harden is a better duo than like say Steph and Draymond at this point.
Mhm.
Like that's just me personally. I don't know if anybody would really agree with that, but because and like when we saw
That's a fair point.
James Harden and Joel Embiid together as a duo in the regular season, I really liked what I saw.
Right.
Lots of good things that I saw, and I think James Harden can kind of replicate that with Kawhi. Like you said, it's just a matter of the postseason, and that's
Yeah.
always been the biggest question with the Clippers.
Right. Yeah. So which one do you expect to probably win more games? Like say in the regular season.
Oh, Clippers,
Okay.
Clippers for sure. And I think that's just
Even
because
with
I like the depth
right.
and I like the pieces that they brought in a little bit more.
Right. So yeah, because the marketing thing hasn't happened yet. But like, let's say if Golden State got marketing, then would you probably say they would probably win more regular season
Then
games?
probably Golden State would, yeah.
Okay, but
Just,
like, when for now the rosters are what they are.
yeah.
Assuming that there could be changes later, but right now we're looking at the rosters as is.
Yeah,
So
going with what we have right now, yeah, I'd say Clippers.
right, yeah, I'd say I would agree with you there. It's just again for Golden State, you're also kind of wondering like maybe do you get another ceiling increase with Kaminga or somebody like that,
Sure.
or what do the other
Yeah,
young
that's what
guys
they
look
have
like?
going
But
for them.
right, because that's what you're projecting.
Yeah.
Like if you're Golden State, you're projecting that there's more higher upside guys than the guys with the Clippers, whereas maybe like with the Clippers, you're projecting like a higher floor. It's just again like if Kawhi and Harden are healthy, they're probably good enough to be able to win you a decent amount of games.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess kind of lastly, again, the big guy that's kind of been rumored, by a lot of teams, right, to be chasing, Lauri Markkanen, right? Obviously we've talked about him multiple times, right? He's been in, a number of rumors. There's been talks about maybe the Jazz aren't that interested in dealing him, but they are, I guess, listening to some offers, right? There've been three teams I think that have kind of been talked about the most, right? And it's Golden State, it's the Spurs, and the Kings. Also, I guess I forgot the Pelicans too as a fourth team, have also come up at different points. So of those four different teams, which one do you like the fit for the most?
Run the teams back.
So, it's Golden State, San Antonio, Sacramento, and then I guess New Orleans also is in that group as well, from what's been reported.
I mean, fit wise, I would probably say. I mean, I'd have to low key go with the Warriors, but
Mm-hmm.
even then, like I said, it doesn't. It's not like a monster move in my opinion. Maybe Sacramento. I feel like Sacramento might be the sleeper deal because I think the way that we've been talking about Sacramento for the past 2 years has been, yeah, we love Fox and Sabonis. You just need more. And I think that would be a huge W if they were able to get marketing because marketing is better than a lot of the names that we floated around for Sacramento.
Right.
Whether it be like Kuzma or Jeremy Grant or any of those guys where it's like, they just need a third creator. So I would probably go with the Kings if you want me to be honest.
Yeah, the benefit for marketing right now, right, is that his contract, right, is a little bit more favorable right now than some of the other guys. But presumably, if you traded for him, you'd be, re-signing him to a long-term deal, right?
Sure.
Like he's making 18 million, excuse me, this year, right? And then he's got, I think, a player option for 27 million right at the end of that. But we don't know what's going to happen. But like I said, presumably whoever trades for him is going to give him an extension.
Right.
I think for me, like a lot of it, some of it kind of depends on like who's in the deal. Because like the thing with say like the Spurs is I don't feel like you have as much in terms of players where like that another team would necessarily want.
Yeah.
For Lauri Markkanen. But if you're the Spurs, do you feel great about giving up a bunch of picks? Like I don't know about that. So whereas say like with Golden State, like you could dangle a Kaminga, right, or some of the other young guys plus picks, right? So maybe the Warriors probably have the most assets. And then the Kings one is kind of interesting because then it's like, all right, who are you giving up in this deal, right? Like
Kevin Huerter.
Yeah, is it like Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, like or is it Keegan Murray that has to be in the deal? Like that's where I don't really know. Like if you're the Kings, I would think you'd prefer to give up Barnes and Huerter for Markkanen than like a Keegan Murray.
Oh, for sure.
But then I guess the question is, that's a funny front court because then you have Markkanen and Sabonis, right, as your 4 and 5. And I guess you're basically relying on Keegan Murray, right, to kind of be like the 3-and-D wing defender because he's been playing the 4. But I guess you'd move him to the 3. But is he better as a 3 or a 4? That would be the main question. And then can Markkanen and Sabonis defensively fit together? But, you would presume you'd have a pretty versatile offense.
Yeah,
and I guess that would kind of be the identity that you would lean into for the Kings. At least you would have some type of identity, right? Like you're probably not a championship team, but assuming you don't do a stupid trade, you're definitely better.
Yeah, it would make me respect the Kings. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like that's a legitimate, serviceable team, I think.
Yeah. I think, like you said, I feel like Warriors probably makes the, because he's playing next to Steph.
Right.
But then I feel like like with the other teams, I feel like there's probably just more long-term benefit just because with the Warriors, how many more years are you going to get high-level Steph versus like the other teams, like say Kings, Spurs, or Pelicans, right? Like you just have more longevity with those teams, right? Just
Yeah.
because of the fact that they're built around younger stars, right? Like say if it's the Spurs and he's playing next to Wemby, right? Like Wemby's not going anywhere for the next several years, right?
Do,
Obviously, maybe obviously the Kings or the Pelicans, maybe there's some more shakeup, but you're still led by like a younger core.
do you think the Spurs would use those picks that they acquired in the Dillingham trade to get Markkanen alongside like a fringe player? I don't know.
Right. That's really what I would do. Like, because I don't feel like giving up immediate picks would make a ton of sense. Because I just don't know. Like if you get Marketing, like you're better, but is that good enough to be able to avoid the play-in? Like, I mean, I don't necessarily know.
Right.
Because if you miss the playoffs, you're a lottery team. But I guess you could also say like, it makes you better. But the problem is next year's draft is really good.
Yeah, that's why I was like, no.
If you're the Spurs, does it even really make any sense to do that? Like, unless, like you said, I didn't even think about that. If you can get Marketing and give up those future picks down the line, then that's fine, right? But if you have to give up immediate picks in the next year or so, you probably wouldn't be as excited about that. Because, again, he's probably not quite good enough to make you, if you're the Spurs, specifically avoid the play-in.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas with the other teams, they're good enough where if you add them, like you're probably you're going to be a playoff team.
Yeah, because I'd rather have like, a very, very high chance of having Dylan Harper, Cooper Flagg, and Ace Bailey,
right.
Versus having some of the other guys in the later, lottery probably if you are going to be a play-in team or around that area.
Yeah, right. And that's where then it's like, then the draft day thing doesn't look anywhere as bad, right? Like, and again, like we've warmed up to it more since, but like if you were able to actually use those picks to get a star player, then that's where like, okay, well that makes a lot more sense now, right? Because more than likely, like Lauri Markkanen is a better player than Rob Dillingham right now, and he's probably going to still be a better player than Rob Dillingham in a few years.
But my thing is like also it's Lauri Markkanen. Like keep in mind there could be somebody else available down the line, which I think might be what they're also doing as well, where it's like, playing the long game or whatever. Because say like a star does ask out and it's like, well, we've got an awesome young team of, Wembanyama, Cooper Flagg, and whoever else comes along.
Right.
Here, take these two picks that are just sitting here doing absolutely nothing.
Right.
And then that puts them into contention versus Markkanen. I don't know what their plan is.
Right, because that's the thing. Because if you're a bad team, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to do anything that makes you a lot better.
That's my question.
Yeah, because then at best you're probably just going to be a play-in team, and then if you're, at best you're a playoff team, and if you're not a lottery team, you're not getting a top draft pick in a really good draft.
Yeah.
Versus like if you're a good team, then it makes a ton of sense because then it just makes you better. Like even if you're the Kings, like if you get Lauri Markkanen, you're probably not a contender, like I said, but you'll still be a better team than you were before. Like you'll have more talent, and it just makes more sense, right? If you're Golden State, like I still wouldn't pick them to come out of the West, but they would be better than they would be with the roster as is.
Yeah, because I guess you're looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, Warriors, we kind of not necessarily need him, but kind of need him alongside we have what it takes to craft a perfect package for him. Then you're looking at the Kings, and it's like, we could use him, we could want him, but we don't have the assets. And then it's like, maybe with the Spurs, we have the picks, but we don't have the players for you. And then Pelicans, I think that was the other one, right?
Yeah, it was the other one.
I don't know how I feel about
what would
that.
a Pelicans deal look like?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, is that Ingram in that deal?
I think it would have to be Ingram. And then maybe what? Markkanen and a pick?
Or something like, because that's the question. Because I guess then it's like, okay, so Markkanen's at the 3, and then Zion's at the 4.
I don't like that, bro.
Unless you have Markkanen at the 5.
Oh God, no.
I don't know. Because the question is how is it? Because I guess you've probably seen him more than me.
Mm-hmm.
But what is his defense like? Because that would be the main question I would have. Because I've seen him play as a scorer, but I haven't paid as much attention to what he's like on defense.
It's nothing special. He needs a guy. He needs a guy next to him though.
Right.
Where it's like he shouldn't be your anchor on the defensive end. He's fine as a 4, complimentary weak side help defender, stuff like that. But like, not your defensive anchor.
Yeah. like let's say if it's Golden State, right? So like he's the 3, Draymond's the 4, and then Trace Jackson Davis is the 5.
Something like that, or you put Dre
Okay.
at center or something. I don't know. As long as Markkanen doesn't get like significant center minutes, I think you're fine. Because I
Okay.
think he's
Yeah.
better as an oversized wing, more so than a center.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
because of the weight, the frame, and maybe
Yeah.
the way that
His
he
style
moves
of
off
play.
the ball. Exactly. He's more perimeter oriented, can
Yeah.
do the stuff in the
He's a
paint, but
scorer.
yes.
Like he's a scorer that likes to, he likes to have the ball. He doesn't need it, but he does more on-ball creation than like a typical big does.
Yeah, Porzingis
So,
without defense. There you go.
right. So, yeah, I guess that would be the main question. So, because that's the thing, because it feels like he's gonna get moved, but I guess the question is like, where does he go? Because I guess if you're Golden State, let's say Kuminga, it's has to be in the deal. Like, would you do that?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm not doing it. Because I
So
feel
for
like
the
Kuminga, you can
Mhm.
play the long game with Kuminga. Like, he's always, I feel like, going to be a good role player no matter what era or, dynasty you want to call it, whatever. I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
beyond the Steph years, I feel like he's going to be an integral part of your rotation versus Markkanen. Who knows?
Right, and then if you're the Kings, if Murray has to be in the deal, are you doing it?
Probably not. Like,
Okay.
that's the tough part because what are the Utah Jazz going to be asking for?
Right.
Because I'm
Yeah.
sure they're stockpiling young guys. That's
Right.
their goal.
Yeah, exactly. And like they're gonna bottom out. So I guess the main thing is like you don't need a ton of players in return, but whatever players you get back is not gonna make the Jazz like a significantly better team.
No,
Like let's say if you're the Jazz and you get back Kaminga, Kaminga's not gonna be winning you 40 plus games and getting you into the play, and you're still gonna be horrible.
right. And that would be kind of, I feel like, the angle that teams would be working, where it's like, you don't even need this guy, just take picks or something like that.
Mhm.
But I don't know.
Oh,
That's why I feel like Markkanen is such a polarizing player, because there's so many different packages that you can cook up.
right.
Um, regarding what you have on your team, like you could give up a
Right.
couple of young guys, or you could give up a decent amount of picks. It all really depends on what Utah
Yeah.
wants. Like,
I
what do
guess
they
the
want?
question is he a player where you feel like you need to overpay in
No,
order to get him? Because say like
no,
with the Knicks, right? Like you could say that they overpaid to get Bridges, but it was also mainly just picks. Like there were no players involved where they're like, oh man, we hate to lose this guy. Like it was
right,
Boyan Bogdanovic and I guess Shake Milton now in that sign and trade deal or whatever it
sure,
was. But like if it's the Warriors, it's different because you know it's either got to be like a package centered around a decent chunk of the young guys, or you'd have to hope that Utah might be okay with just like Wiggins and other stuff. Which that would be the best case scenario if if you're Golden State. Like if you're Utah, you want back Kaminga, but like I guess the question is, if you're Utah, are you in a rush to deal him? I guess would be the other question.
Markkanen probably not.
Because with or without him, like you're still probably gonna lose a lot of games. It's just
Yeah,
the question is like are you hurting your floor by keeping him on the roster as long as possible? Like, does it just make more sense to deal him now and get it over
I
with?
mean,
Or do you keep him? Like, I guess, is keeping and extending him a bad thing if you're Utah?
no, I think it's
Okay.
good. I think it's a good thing. I would just say take the right deal, and for the right deal, I think he's gone. But
Right.
what is the right deal? That's what's up in the air.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like he could be a longevity piece where you just continue to extend him. He keeps playing well, and then
Hmm.
because like you said, he's gonna play well regardless if they're good or
Yeah.
bad. I feel like
Still put up numbers.
exactly. So that's worth something. I feel like you have to pay the man.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, if you're the Jazz, I think it would suck to, like, get nothing back for him.
right.
But I guess also, like, is he in a tier where a team should give up, like, the farm to get him?
No, that's my point.
Right. Like, how do other teams value him? I guess would be the interesting question, and we won't know unless he's dealt. But I guess
Yep.
also like if there was a deal that they were pretty comfortable with, it would have already happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on these teams and what they've done so far, what they might do. Let us know your thoughts on the marketing thing, right? Like, do you think that Utah should trade him? And if so, where should he go, right? Because we've obviously been talking about it, and there's still going to be talks going on, right? Obviously, if you haven't already done so, continue to like and subscribe. We're trying to reach 100 subscribers. We're almost there, right? We're about 14 subs away.
Yep.
So if you could do that, we really appreciate it, right? Obviously, at different points, we'll continue to do some live streams, and we'll let you know. But regardless, again, do all of that. We appreciate it, and we'll either see you in the next live stream or the next episode.